Thanks. Okay. So welcome, folks. If you are joining us as an observer, this is a meeting of the steering committee of the Vermont Climate Council. And we have agenda and supporting documents online. And I'll just keep posting it into the chat. I'll go ahead and show the agenda of what we're aiming to do today. If you give me 1 second. Okay, so this is our agenda for today. And as usual, we need to do a quick approval of the previous minutes. And then we have these overlapping conversations that Jane has prepared a bunch of information for. But the essence of it is we really need to think about our schedule and how we're going to function as a council from now until December 1st, and the sequence of conversations and how that's going to work. And then you all as a steering committee, since you have this role of like approving agendas and everything, we need an agile way to make this work. So that's what that conversation is all about. It's like setting the council up for success in a sequence of conversations and you feeling comfortable about those conversations and your role in setting agendas and approving agendas and all that, because we have the weekly meetings, et cetera now. So that's this conversation, and Jane will do it better than I will, what I'm trying to say right now. And then there was a request to have a conversation about what happened with the rescheduling of the affinity space conversation for the BIPOC affinity space. And so that's a piece on the agenda, is just to clarify what that was. And Chris, you may miss that. I know that you were the one who was very eager to hear that. So maybe we can make sure quick before you leave, if there's any questions you have that, you could lob that in. All right, Chris, because I know you're gonna have to leave a little early. We'll make time for public comment at the end as well. Okay, so that's our agenda. Welcome, Secretary Young as well. We just jumped right in.
Well, thank you. Sorry I was late.
No worries at all. Okay, any quick feedback on today's agenda about what we're supposed to do? We only have an hour today, so we are kind of cooking along. Any feedback on this or things that should be done differently? We good? Okay, great. So let's dive into the first one. If anybody needs time to look at these, quick click through. Any concerns about the minutes? Anybody need a little bit of time to look at those minutes? Okay, hearing no concerns or requests for more time, let's treat those as approved. Thanks, everybody. So let's get into the meat here of this conversation about the meetings. I'll stop sharing now. And Jane, I wonder if you want to walk us through sort of the pieces of this, because I feel like they're so overlapping, the different components of how we are setting a sequence of conversations for these weekly council meetings, how we're asking counselors and all of us to be prepared for those, and what that means for the role of the steering committee. So if you want to just sort of walk us through all that, and then maybe we have a consolidated conversation about it, that might be the best approach.
Sure. So thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. So there's a number of documents that were posted associated with this conversation, and I might just give a high-level overview of one of our thinking on this before I sort of dive into some of the specifics, and just suggest that the pace of weekly meetings, coupled with the drafting and the work of the subcommittees, will present a challenge, I think, for how we continue to meet as a steering committee. And so there's just a question around directionality and the consideration of approval of the agenda for this coming Tuesday, but then a recognition and appreciation of the process as laid out on the 2 slides that I can share around the sort of tempo and pace for the meetings, and therefore how, if we could approve it in a general space around the concept of the workflow over the course of the next weeks, leaving some directionality around specific agendas to Marion, I, David, and however else you would like to proceed with the specific agendas for each of those meetings. And then a question around how often we as a steering committee come together or review those agendas. So I will, perhaps I'd like to just share real quick with that context. Okay. There's been a lot of updating and consideration of the meetings and how they're going to flow over the course of the next 6 weeks or so. These conversations have been informed by more realistic timelines for specific subcommittees and appreciation that we scheduled additional council meetings in order to give us some more time and space, both for subcommittees to prepare the necessary work for those meetings, but also for us to think about constructively how we have those conversations as a council and consume information, since there's just a ton of information coming up to the council. So I'll walk through this slide quickly and then highlight the specific agenda for this coming Tuesday. And then hopefully we can fall back on some of the other documents that are posted if folks are interested in doing so around the CAP outline itself and the CAP drafting process specifically, to think about how and any improvements could be made or changes to be made about the information coming up to the council and space for substantive conversation to unfold. And you'll note in the agenda that specifically we wanted to talk a little bit about the need or interest in having longer meetings, B, in-person meetings, really when we expect there to be tricky ideas and actions coming up, to give space to have what often I would imagine we all agree is a more authentic conversation in person, to actually understand how people are feeling and give space for that rather than over Zoom. So briefly, I don't think that much of this will be a surprise. These slides have been shared with you in the past. Again, this more up-to-date slide takes into account now the meeting that we have this coming Tuesday on the 19th and the 2 additional meetings in November, I believe on the 2nd and 16th were the additional ones we added. So moving into next Tuesday's meeting, we're really, there will not be any components of the climate action plan coming up for review. That meeting will really focus on public engagement, and the need for that additional meeting was really spurred by the challenges that we had holding the BIPOC affinity space last week. And therefore, in order to bring comprehensive engagement to the council, we really wanted to delay the review of that information until we could hold the BIPOC affinity space, which we did Tuesday night of this week, to include that analysis and information and comment in the discussion with the council. So next Tuesday's meeting will really focus on that public engagement and provide for a space for us to start to think about what the rollout of the plan will look like and how we really have authentic engagement after December 1st too, in what spaces and what questions we ask around that, and how we coordinate with the CEP rollout as well. So it'll be a really productive meeting, one that isn't jammed with a lot of other stuff, in order for us to really have a great conversation, I hope, about public engagement. And I will say that the 11th hour change for this coming Tuesday speaks to the carbon budget, which we had hoped to also include on Tuesday's agenda, but a recognition that that the timing for Ag and Eco wasn't communicated clearly, that will actually stay off of the agenda for this coming Tuesday and carry forward to the October 26th meeting, where we'll really be focused on science and data, both components, the components of the climate action plan that'll be lifted up for review and digestion, and then have a robust conversation about the carbon budget. So it actually flows nicely that way, and gives more time for us to talk about the public engagement. So that's the only change on this slide that is not accurate here, because Marianne made the change to the agenda for the this coming Tuesday, like at 2:30 this afternoon, based on back and forth with Ag and Eco task leads on that. The next sort of real substantive meeting where we're going to have a lot of information to digest is the final modeling and actions being presented from cross-sector, which will be at the November 2nd meeting. This is one that we're flagging potentially we'd want to do in person, since there's already been questions raised and concerns around some of the high priority actions coming out of cross-sector. We saw that when their preliminary actions were raised, it might be a nice meeting to consider doing in person. So I'm flagging that there, but that is the flow for the November 2nd meeting. November 9th is a similar meeting, but focused not on cross-sector actions and review, but on the actions, the high priority actions and drafting of components from ag and eco and rural resilience and adaptation. And that is another meeting that could be in person, but is also one just that's going to have a lot of information to consider. And this schedule, you'll see, all shows the dates of when things are due to be sent out to the council with ample time for review the week before, and then when the written comments are due as well. And we've tried, this slide is really, we didn't want folks to have to continue to go back and forth from this slide to the outline. And so the outline document, as put online now, identifies the lead authors for every section of the climate action plan, as well as the due dates for every section, so that it's sort of a one-stop shop, as well as components of how the drafting and review will be done. So just moving on, we have a new section within the climate action plan that speaks to cross-cutting pathways and implementation and the pulling up and interrelated nature of the pathways that and actions coming out of the 3 respective subcommittees working in that space. And that will be a specific day and section for us to think about, because we want to have all of the work come out of the 3 separate subcommittees and then pull it all together in one space and consider that for the council. And that felt like another potential chance where we could really get together, because at that point we would have also received and understood and seen all the actions and work coming out of the respective subcommittees, and therefore could also hit on that day any lingering questions or concerns from previous presentations from ag and eco and rural resilience, or from cross-sector from the previous 2 meetings. You'll see that on November 23rd, any final sections of the climate action plan that hadn't been presented to the council to date will be shared, and that comprehensive climate action plan will be discussed. Those are sections that include the implementation section, as well as the executive summary, and will likely spur a really, hopefully, a thoughtful conversation about tone and any changes at that point for us to be working on and revising for our final meeting on December 1st. So there's really a pretty natural flow now for the remaining meetings. I can shift and show you the specific agenda for this coming Tuesday, although, as I just alluded to, there isn't much beyond public engagement. There's really just also the Just Transitions reflection that we've built in, with the opportunity to hear from our Deputy Secretary within A&R on A&R's work to incorporate diversity, equity, inclusion in our agency, and some of those components for discussion to build us to the following week, where Senator Ron Hinsdale will come and speak with us about the EJ bill. And so I'm happy to share that agenda, but also happy to pause at this point and just recognize that this is the general flow for the meetings. I'd be appreciative to hear if there's any general concern around how we have this set up, and if there's general consensus around thinking about a new way for then approval and review of the specific agendas associated with each of these meetings, or whether we'll still need steering committee meetings in between our council meetings weekly to think about how we do agenda approval.
Great.
I'm going to stop sharing.
That's great. And I think that's super helpful, Jane. And the other question there, that's the real dilemma, is the in-person part. And so that's something we want to talk about today as well. Julie, go ahead, please.
I just want to, I guess, discuss a little bit what we're talking about when we say adopted on those dates. I think there's sort of a push-pull here in trying to sort of lock down certain pieces of it. And at the same time, I think it may be hard absent sort of having a complete document. And obviously that word has a fairly specific statutory connotation in the case of the climate action plan, and just want to make sure that there's a common understanding and agreement about what sort of action we will take following each of those presentations.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I'm
happy to respond now, and appreciate that it's adopt was probably the wrong word to use, but the challenge, again, as we started to sort of get into at the council meeting this week is that there will only be the November 23rd where that comprehensive draft comes back to the council. So the intent would be to take action on the document that as being presented, mindful of the substantive challenge conflicts that arise, and we hopefully reach consensus around how to advance in further drafting at those meetings.
Yeah. Liz?
I was going to pick up on the subcommittee because that was, as I was watching the presentation and thinking about it, that was my question. Like, what do we think the subcommittee role is that could actually help advance? It feels to me like that would actually be helpful. Like I can see in cross-sector at least some places where things could get refined or things could get combined because they've been so separate. And it would almost be like helpful to have that subcommittee stop operating in sector buckets and instead operate together for a while. But I haven't been attending the other subcommittees, so.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that, but I wonder, Jane, if that sparks some thinking from you.
Well, Liz, are you speaking specifically to the cross-cutting pathways component of the work?
A little bit, but like even like, so again, it may just, maybe the answer will be subcommittee meetings and need will vary. Like that could be the answer. But for cross-sector, at least, it feels like in addition to the actual cross-cutting as defined, there's some need to just mesh, meld, not repeat, make sure things consistently fit together among the sector discussions too, that maybe could happen at the subcommittee level and therefore make this council smoother. And that may be just that committee. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a really great point, Liz, and one that we should focus on for cross-sector in particular, because with the cross-cutting pathways, some of the initial work in that space was to like land use and compact settlement in particular as this elevated issue to rise up. We want to make sure that the actions that are coming out of each of the subcommittees working in that space aren't in conflict and in fact speak all to each other to enhance the strategy and speak to it in the buckets of all of the climate action space. And so I could see that same breakdown of silos across the subcommittees needing to happen still in cross-sector, as even through prioritization and now through equity work, we're working siloed in cross-sector. So yeah, we should think about that.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's, you know, when you talk about EV charging and you talk about electrification of homes, those things go together, weatherization, but what we also mean is electrification of some measures. I mean, all that stuff that we've kind of talked about, but we haven't really brought it together as a subcommittee yet. It's still very siloed.
Okay. Secretary Young.
Thank you. I started with the same question as Secretary Moore, and I think, Liz, you've kind of hit this notion of adopting it. Each section is, I don't think it's, you know, sitting well with some of us because it's a plan, it's the whole plan, and you know, precisely the reason why we want to see it as a comprehensive, complete plan is for a number of reasons. What fits together, what doesn't, are there conflicts, and you know, maybe the subcommittees taking a look at, you know, pieces and parts as a whole, you know, could be helpful. But the actual statutory duty of this council is to adopt the plan. And so when you use, we're going to adopt this piece here and this piece there, I think, you know, the use of that term is a little in conflict with the ultimate, you know, ultimate act of this council acting as a body.
Yeah, I'll just chime in here because we talked about this on Tuesday, right, at the council meeting as well. And I think where we landed there was the thing that this council adopts and approves and sends off is December 1, the plan. The reason we're eager to have real serious conversation about content and to see how aligned the council is around content, even if it's piece by piece, is that we don't have time to wait till this November 23rd to realize there's a big problem. So we want to figure out what those red flags are as early as possible and be able to end those conversations saying, okay, we're feeling pretty good about all this. We have these pending concerns we haven't quite nailed yet, right? Or we're not quite, subcommittee, can you come back to us with this? Or small group, can you go do a little bit of work? But we need to be able to get to that place, even if we're doing it piece by piece. And it's frustrating to do that, but we have to, or else we won't have time at the end to solve it. Chris?
And just looking ahead, I see Jane responded, but Jane, you might want to poll all the counselors to see their availability that week period. Not just for the 23rd, but and this isn't about me. I mean, my situation is what it is, but just out of this small group, there are 2 of us who are already going to be traveling on the 23rd. So we might, yeah, so I just suggest you poll everybody to see what the situation is.
Okay. It's a little daunting because if we don't meet.
Yeah, maybe it's just confirming that they really will be there. Yeah, I mean, 'cause I did it in a way that I should be able to attend. I'm just agreeing with Chris that you never know what happens over the holidays.
Yeah. Secretary Moore.
I just maybe changing subjects a little bit. I do think there would be real value to considering in-person meetings and maybe a longer one or two. I'm cognizant of conditions on the ground right now, and that it may not be in everyone's comfort zone, but at the same time, I think as we get into some of these more thorny conversations and where there really is a lot of devil in the details, I think having people in the same room has an enormous amount of value. And I would just like to leave open the option that 1 or 2 of these sessions in person would really, I think, help move things forward in a way we're going to struggle to do remotely.
Thanks, Secretary. And I think let's just talk just a second about that specifically. So what's been discussed with Jane and Marion and everyone is, can we find a space that feels comfortable because it's big enough and that has the tech so that those who aren't in person don't feel completely out of, can feel part of the story as well. So there's the location aspect of it. And there's the realization that we're probably not going to get 100% because not 100% would feel potentially comfortable. So we have to have tech that allows us to do that in a hybrid approach, which won't be perfect because there isn't, but could be decent. So I don't know, Jane, if you want to say a little bit more about that and the thinking about that.
Yeah, we started to talk a bit about the challenge of the timing of an in-person meeting, having the benefit of having tried, the rescheduling of our council meetings. Finding a date and time feels at this point like a futile effort that would work for everybody. So our gut was, I'll just say, to stick with the time that we have on Tuesdays and extend it one way or the other. However, knowing that the governor's press conferences are Tuesdays right up until the council meeting, so there's no flexibility for executive branch officials that participate in that. There was a question about having it on Tuesdays, but going late into later than 4:30 into the evenings. And that is one idea that we've been thinking, so that we're sticking with the time that works for most counselors that we have found and trying to build out based on that. And then second, speaking to location, we don't know of one yet, and wanted to ask that of people if there is a suggested location that we could explore for having one of these kinds of meetings. I know that we've been hoping to get our main conference room and A&R staffed with those cameras and moving around, but there was also just the recognition and appreciation that the size of the conference room and A&R may not be big enough to really feel safe and comfortable, and not have any windows in would be challenging. So we don't really have a great location within our own campus. So happy to take this on, but also would appreciate any recommendations that steering committee members have around location and or how best to go about scheduling a really challenging group to schedule.
Yeah. Secretary Young?
I think we have to assume it's going to be mostly remote. With the holidays, the conditions on the ground, and all of the challenges that you've put out there, Jane. I guess I'm trying to be realistic. And but maybe it is a poll or a discussion, a poll and a discussion at the next climate council meeting about how many would attend an in-person meeting, masked, because it is a requirement, at least for state employees, to be masked at a work event. And then maybe you'll have a better idea of a location, how big a location you need to accommodate those who are going to attend in person.
Great.
I like
And it
the
has the
idea of
tech.
trying, of trying to do a poll around this issue ahead of Tuesday's meeting, if possible, because we have the time on Tuesday to actually have this conversation. And so that seems like a really great idea. And I see there's some good ideas in the chat around.
And I would say, a poll, I guess we've been using in a couple of our meetings, and we did it at extended cabinet, that forms. But I think that's a Microsoft Teams product that you can use with a Teams meeting, where you can kind of do an anonymous survey of people, ask them a question and they'll answer, and you kind of get the instant results. I don't know what might be available through Zoom to do that. So I don't want people to feel put on the spot either. Anyway, it's going to be, I think we have to acknowledge it's going to be tough under the current, all of the conditions that are going to be facing us in November, both travel, holiday, and otherwise.
Yeah. Okay. Chris?
Before we even get to public participants, I've kind of lost track. How many counselors are there, or what, and other staff? I mean, how much space do we need?
23
There's
counselors.
23.
23 counselors, then if subcommittees, decide, and they've been pretty active. I mean, I think when I last added up subcommittees and staff on that sheet, I think we're up to 60 to 70, right, Jane? And then it's a public meeting, so we could very well get a very big public contingent attending. I'm not trying to discourage the in-person meeting. I'd love to have an in-person meeting. I'm just, the venue will matter. And it's a public meeting, and it's going to be a deliberative meeting. And I would expect a turnout from the public in person as well.
That's where I was going, Secretary Young. I was thinking just the baseline of counselors, and you start adding everybody up. I'm at the Hilton in Burlington right now, at a first big conference I've been to in person. So that may even, we may be pushing limits even for universities. That's what I just was trying to throw that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me just test the waters here with you all as a steering committee, though. What I'm hearing is, yes, in principle, going for some kind of in-person sounds valuable, and yet we need to test reality. How many counselors will we really get? And could we get a venue that can handle the numbers that we may end up getting? So those are question marks to it, but I just push back quickly if anyone's feeling like, just don't even go down that road of trying in person, because it's a waste of everybody's time. I just want to test, like, everybody's on board with let's try to make it work, particularly for the November 2nd. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, if on my part, it's yes, if we have the technology to do a hybrid meeting, and that's out there. We've had some very successful hybrid meetings using the phone as the audio in the room. Yes, if we can find a venue large enough for everyone to meet safely, and yes, if those who attend are yes, if everyone's welcome to attend, and we including the public.
Right.
So
great.
I do, as we think about that and think about advancing that at the council meeting on Tuesday, I would like to refine when and where in the schedule the idea of those kinds of meetings make the most sense. And I do, the way that we had suggested it was around November 2nd being when cross-sector would be presenting the bulk of their work, and the 16th, which is when there was more space to be thinking holistically after having heard from all three of the subcommittees on their work. And so my question then becomes, I imagine we could ask about the possibility and interest in two, but my preference would be if we were going to have one in person and spend some more substantive time together, it would be great to do it on the 16th when we've heard from all of the subcommittees by that point and are able to lift up any challenging issues that we really want to dive back into as a group, and can do that in person.
That makes a lot of sense, Jane. Okay, so priority is the 16th, when we're able to work through issues that we will have identified and those three subcommittees are going to present. Okay, that's the priority, right? And if it's easy to do a couple more, great, right? We'll do the second as well or something. But the 16th is what we're really pushing for. Okay, great. In that time slot in the afternoon, the sort of 1:30 to 5:30, something like that, I think is 5:36, maybe even that kind of chunk of time. Okay, does that sound good for everybody? We'll push on that. Okay. Jared?
I just wanted to go back a second to see if we'd kind of close the question or come to agreement on this question of, given the increased frequency of meetings, kind of the role of the steering committee and the frequency of steering committee meetings relative to agenda design. I guess I would just say to try to go back to that, and that I would be comfortable broadly kind of affirming, the arc that's been presented. And if there are meetings, shifts that happen in between steering committee meetings, having some flexibility for Jane and Marion and David to shift, like, for instance, what just happened with needing to shift the carbon budget from discussion from one meeting to the next. But overall, I'd like to keep the steering committee meetings happening, because as much as we try to project what the arc of the meetings is going to be, I think we're going to keep seeing some dynamism to, like, emerging issues or things that may need to be adjusted. And I wouldn't want to fully pull back from that role. I think this is a valuable discussion space for us to identify things that need to be lifted up for our agenda time together. But I also recognize that the kind of frequency and the kind of, being able to flexibly respond between steering committee meetings is also a need. So those are just some of my initial thoughts on that question.
Thanks, Jared. Jane, what do we have on the books right now in terms of the next steering committee meetings? Do we have one? We haven't.
I don't think so, no.
I don't think we do.
Yeah, we don't. I wasn't sure if there was one special meeting scheduled in November at some point, but I'm pretty confident that Marion suggested too that we don't have any scheduled, largely because we originally were going to meet on off weeks on Tuesdays, and now there are no off weeks. And so that's the question. Like, to me, the regular council meetings, if we approve the general arc of the meetings, seem to be not much flexibility within those agendas as is, but the critical need to bring the steering committee back together would be to plan for the November 16th meeting, especially if in person, but regardless if it is not in person, because that meeting in itself will be perhaps where there's most flexibility to lift up and plan for some substantive conversation around issues. And we want to make sure that we were all in agreement on what those issues were coming forward from the previous meetings.
So that's a specific proposal.
I thought we had one on November 30th.
Yeah. That's a specific proposal for you all right now on the steering committee to say, essentially, the next meeting for you will be to plan the most complicated meeting, which would be using our time wisely in person, getting that framed up correctly. And also we could check in on other things, but that would mean with some anticipation to November 16th, setting a time for us to meet. Otherwise, having the confidence that we're going to implement what's said on that flow of meetings that Jane presented. So let me just test. Liz, did you want to jump in on that or something else?
Quickly on that, I'm great with having our next meeting focus on that. And on the 16th, we have a hold on our calendar in the afternoon. That would be the anticipated switch to in-person and perhaps extend. Okay.
Push it longer.
It's like just one person. I can't do the morning that day. So there might be other people who are holding and, you know, manipulating their schedule. So, which is what I did.
Yeah, our, as I mentioned, the executive branch can't do before 1:30, so.
Okay, so yeah, just to be really clear, we're talking November 16th in the afternoon, 1:30 to 6 or something, 5:36 or something like that. Location TBD, right? Okay. All right. And then I do want to sort of make sure we close this off well in terms of your next meeting as a steering committee will be to plan in particular November 16th, but also make any other adjustments that need to happen along the road. So that should be probably what, 10 days before or something like that.
My preference would be to schedule that right after we hang up today. I'll work on that, but the after November 9th, because at that point that will be the council meeting where we will have heard from Ag and Eco and Rural Resilience, and that will be after which we can then really thoughtfully plan for the 16th. That won't leave much time though, I ask you all that, but if we could come together on the 10th, the next day, hopefully we could really ensure that we're teeing up the meeting for the 16th.
Okay, any concerns with that approach? Okay.
One of those days has got to be better. Which is now hitting me.
All right. And God willing, schedules will allow us, yes. Okay. So I wonder, Jane, are there other components here? We've talked about in-person and have a plan for that. We've talked about steering committee meeting we have a plan for that. Is there some other piece we need to nail down right now with the steering committee?
I do just want to provide the opportunity for steering committee members to reflect on the email chain that happened, which is what was relative to the point around a strategy for consuming information. There was just a recognition still and a concern about like the short times that folks have to make compelling cases for work that's been taking 6 months to get to that point, and then how counselors react and consume that information. What we're trying to do now, it sounds like, is continue along the process as we've been sort of doing, and then hold space on the 16th to really revisit and dive into some of those lingering issues and policy issues and questions. But if folks have another approach or suggestion, which really for me only means longer meetings or more in-person meetings, happy to hear that. But I just want to recognize and appreciate that I know it's a ton of information. It feels like we're being talked to, and I haven't really come up with any other creative way, or nor has David or Mary and I, in just bringing that information up to the council as the council sort of a plenary and listening. And so just want to make sure that there isn't another interest that we're not seeing or hearing from you all, if there's a different way or other way to approach how the work transitions from the subcommittees up to the council.
I'm not sure I have an answer for you, Jane. I just have an observation or a perspective. Is we have to appreciate and be sensitive to the fact that not everyone is doing this climate council work on a full-time basis. It's additive to a 40, 50-hour week job. It feels like for some, there's just not enough time to digest the written materials that are coming at us on a Tuesday. I'm just looking at, for instance, what you posted before. I'm still not sure when to expect what. And we have a meeting. We have science and data components of the CAP. Section 9 will be circulated on the 19th. And then we'll have a science and data focused council meeting on the 26th. And so no action there. It's really, I guess we get those components of the CAP, and then we're going to have a meeting. Are we going to talk about adopting those on the 26th? And so then we have sections 1 and 11 distributed on the 26th, and then we're going to have something to be adopted, which is the cross-sector mitigation actions, I thought, final modeling. And when is that going to be distributed? Just for purposes of planning, which ones are the more complex and involved? I think the more time we need. And so when will we get the November? I think just for clarity, everybody needs to have a really good idea of when something is coming, that it comes, and that if they're only being given a short period of time, which is going to be primarily on their weekends, that we know what's going to be happening on the Tuesday. So this, notion of responding to it right away and getting written comments into the staff, before the meeting, when you're probably not going to be able to even review the materials until the weekend, it's not enough time. I agree. And I know you're doing your best, but I think it would be helpful to counselors who face those timing issues within their own worlds, and do not work on this day in and day out for 8 hours, to know what to expect. And so I'm just really confused on, for instance, the November 2 meeting.
So I completely appreciate that. So thank you for bringing it up. And we can always be clearer. So I appreciate that. But the CAP, we have revised, you'll see attached to the steering committee agenda today, and we'll go out again in an email update. It went out last Friday to council members and subcommittee members, the CAP drafting process. We've updated that with explicit clarity around the drafting guidance and deadlines now, so that it's all there around how comments will be reviewed and received, because it felt unclear this time with those first 4 drafts, what the expectation was there and who was getting those comments. That CAP drafting process has been completely updated based on the conversation at the council on Tuesday. All documents, regardless of if they're CAP components or for other items on the agenda now, are posted a whole week ahead of time. And we set that stage for the meeting this week by producing all those documents the week before. On October 5th, everything was posted for October 12th. And so on. That will be the case for everything that is coming, all the sections of the climate action plan, all the components. The only thing this week coming on the 19th is that we don't have anything to review ahead of time. It's going to be a robust conversation through a presentation from our consultants. So there is no homework for this coming council meeting, but everything for the following council meeting around science and data and ag and eco will get posted on Tuesday.
All right, well, I think that just my confusion is just looking at this one document you posted, CAP drafting deadlines. There is on October 26th, I'm sorry to be perseverating on this, but on October 19, we'll get the science and data components. We'll talk about those on the 26th. We'll get the opening sections and the mitigation pathways sections on the 26th to discuss on the 2nd, but the November 2nd meeting says we're going to get the presentation of final modeling and CSM actions to be adopted. And maybe I'm just not understanding sufficiently.
I think maybe the adopted language is what's confusing, because that was great clarity that you and Secretary Moore just provided around, like, we shouldn't say adopting because that's may be causing confusion, but it does link to what's being distributed on the 26th. It's very directly
which is the opening
section.
Opening section from council and mitigation pathways.
Yes, so there's There is
Okay.
another section also just to keep us on a timely schedule around the opening section of the CAP, which is the letter from the council that will be also shared at that time.
So CSM and mitigation pathways are the same thing. I guess that's what I'm simply. Okay.
Yes, they are the
All
same
right.
thing. Sorry.
I
Yeah.
thought
Yeah,
that was
sorry,
cross.
same thing. That maybe it's my insider knowledge and terminology. I have to be more explicitly using the same terms, but yes, it's the same thing.
It's the acronyms that'll get us every time.
I have a
Maybe
feeling
anyway.
we may be able to rework this document into something that may be a touch more intuitive, where it's like the week ahead, something happens. So let's see if there's a way to do that in a way that,
Happy to.
yeah.
And I also do think that this slide was really intended for you all today. And then what we want people to be using going forward is the CAP outline and the CAP drafting process, because those two documents are explicitly clear and speak to each other. And so this slide was really for you all today to approve an arc of flow of meetings, but we're trying to make it obsolete so people don't have to go back and forth from the slide to the doc. Marion did a great job updating the drafting process. The outline is updated. That's all what people should really be looking at. And hopefully I can send out an email that clarifies that for people so that confusion isn't there anymore. And this, hopefully this slide then just goes away.
Great. Okay. So we had one more thing we wanted to talk about. So I'd love to push there. Jared, last word on this?
Sorry, it's actually on the piece before, and if I'm a lone voice on this, I'm happy to be quiet and move on. I guess I'm just wondering, it feels to me like we have pretty good clarity on the council agendas for the next two meetings. Maybe I haven't looked at a set of documents closely enough. It feels to me like the third and fourth ones out are a little less formed, even if we are seeing that overall arc. It just strikes me as a little bit, I'm a little uncomfortable going 4 full council meetings without a steering committee check-in in terms of how things are going and future agendas and possible adaptations. So I agree with Jane that it would be good to meet like on November 10th, after that November 9th meeting. But I wonder if we also, especially if there's going to be some complexity around a possible in-person meeting, if it would also make sense to try to schedule a steering committee meeting like the end of the week of October 25th, like after that October 26th. So we're kind of doing steering committee meetings aiming after, no more than 2 council meetings before we're able to reconnect and kind of assess where things stand in future agendas.
Lauren, do you want to jump in on that?
I'll just jump in so Jared doesn't have to be the lone voice. I do think it makes sense, just given how challenging it is to find time on schedules week of or even week prior, to go ahead and find some slots just as placeholders should we need to use them, and not necessarily with a firm schedule or intent to meet, but just knowing that we have that space should we need to meet. And I don't really have a thought necessarily like Jared did on when and how frequently that should be, but just noting that if we do go that route, sooner is better so we can have placeholders on our calendars.
Great. Does anybody have a concern doing that? We essentially 2 weeks out, we grab some time on your calendars. We grab some time on November 10th. We already have time on November 30th. Any concerns with that? Okay, great. Thanks, Jared and Lauren. Okay.
Thanks.
Anything else on this about how we're going to be functioning, you're going to be functioning, the steering committee? Okay, super. So the last thing we wanted to do here was there was a request for a little more clarity what happened with that BIPOC affinity event that was finally held this week as opposed to last week. And I just want to double check because Chris was the key person who really wanted it. Do folks, is that something you want to spend a minute or two on right now? You want to hear just a little bit more about what happened? Yeah. Okay. Jane, can you give us the, 1 to 2 minute version of this? What happened in that and what inspired that change in time?
Yeah, so we had a number of sort of troubling calls that a bunch of us fielded, myself, our director of communications, Kaya Morris, and Sarika Tandon, all fielded separate calls that caused concern that there were likely going to be people coming to the event with not good intentions. as well as a surge in registration about 2 hours before the event was scheduled. That led us to think that there were going to be people at the event intended to trolling the event and not there to actually speak to the issues we were trying to speak to. And so because there weren't, because it was a BIPOC affinity event, there were minimal number of people intended to be on there as facilitators and tech folks, because we weren't planning on joining as not being members of BIPOC communities. And so the Sarika and Kaya made the difficult choice to cancel it at 5:40, to about 20 minutes before it was supposed to happen, because they were afraid that if the event started becoming unruly, that they wouldn't have the means to mandate and kick people out, or know how to even, what the protocol for that would be and how to deal with that. So they made that call. I spoke to Kaya. I supported her in making that call. They canceled it. There were quite a few challenges with canceling it because of an email. Oh, I should say that also our consultant sent out an email for a calendar invite with the Zoom registration, and unfortunately didn't use a BCC. Therefore making it public, all of the people who were participating in the event as well. So names were out there. So people were, that's not normal practice with these kinds of events. And so all of that, we canceled it. I sent an email the following morning apologizing and suggesting recourse for how we would handle it. And we lost participants over the course of last week, but we also were able to think about how other ways that we might be able to reach members of these communities that weren't involved in the engagement. We did do some paper mailing of surveys right after the event was canceled. We thought about other ways to think about furthering engagement in the space for future iterations of the Climate Action Plan and the rollout of the draft. And we were able to move forward with it on Tuesday of this week. And I actually did participate in it this time. That was one of the changes to course that we took, so that I could be on to monitor and orient us to the event in the evening. And they also had 2 additional support staff from RISE Consulting who were specifically monitoring the Zoom and thinking about how we would deal with people.
Thanks, Jane. So that's what happened.
Was the Tuesday's event successful?
Was the event this week successful?
Yeah, was it event free, or incident free?
Yeah, we had one person who was there not to participate as a member of the BIPOC community, but he kept his camera off and was quiet.
Great. Okay. Anything else on that before we shift to do public comment, if anybody's here? But any other questions for Jane on that event?
Lauren?
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Lauren, raise your hand.
Yeah, it's a little hard to see up in this corner here. Jane, for the combined public outreach presentation that's going to be given to the council, will this issue be captured or lessons learned so that we can kind of memorialize how to handle events like this better in the future? Like, that seems like a specific after action piece that should be folded into that report.
Yeah, we did talk. I mean, David, please, and Marion too. That we had our check-in yesterday with Climate Access and RISE, and planned for the event for how they'll communicate the findings on Tuesday. And really, if you'll see on the agenda, 3 different components of. And we intend to pause after each component to really reflect and engage with the council around questions around each of those components. And one of those is about lessons learned and gaps and in the engagement that we weren't able to reach certain communities. And there were other specific gaps that Sarika has identified that I imagine she'll speak to on Tuesday. So.
That's great. Thanks.
Super. Anything else on this, folks? Okay, great. All right, so if there are folks who aren't members of the steering committee who would like to weigh in, I see Bram's here, I see someone on the telephone is here. Any quick comments folks need to make or would like to make before we finish up? Hi, Bram, how's it going? You all set? Okay, great. And I see there's someone on the phone. I don't know whether that's one of us, maybe on the phone, or maybe it's.
That's
Julie. Julie on the phone. Yeah.
Julie, yeah.
So I don't see anybody else besides that. So I think we're all set on the public comment side of things. Anything else before we finish up today? Okay. So we have the specific agreements that we talked about today about getting on your schedules in about 2 weeks' time and on the 10th. Proactively looking for the in-person options, particularly for the 16th, and doing a survey of the council members around that. There were some other things that I'm looking at my notes right now, but those were the big ones that I heard. Anything else, Jane or Marion or anyone else? I'm missing anything? Okay, great. Okay, folks. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Yep. Bye.
Bye all.